Hi, my name is Pat, and this is my channel, Book Chat with Pat, and I'm glad that you're here. Today I'm going to be doing my weekly wrap-up for the week ending January 18th. This has been a really productive reading week for me, where I've been able to complete several books that I had been working on for various projects and reading events. And I've also made decent headway in some of the books that I'm continuing to read, but which I have not yet finished. That said, it's also been a real mixed bag in terms of really the emotional effect that some of this reading has had on me. And I'll talk a little bit about that as I come to individual books. First, the ongoing projects that I'm still in the middle of. As I've been talking about for a couple of weeks now, I have committed to reading volume 1, Swann's Way, of Marcel Proust's In Search of Lost Time. This is an event that's been organized by my friend Greg at Another Bibliophile Reads. Greg intends to read all 6 volumes of Proust's master work. The jury's still out for me as to whether I'm going to read beyond volume 1 at this time. We're talking about the book in Greg's Discord. I'm about 250 pages into volume 1. I get what it is that makes Proust so special. I understand why this is an extraordinary work. I am interested in what he's demonstrating about how memory works. He includes various sights, sounds, smells, tastes that the narrator experiences, all of which trigger memories of things long past. And he writes in very long descriptive sentences. I'm just feeling at this time in my life, I'm feeling a certain degree of impatience. I had a similar experience actually on my third reread of Joyce's Ulysses this past summer. One doesn't read Proust for the story. I don't think this is about, figuring out the plot. But I also am feeling like I want there to be more of a story. I know it's coming. I know things are just about to happen. I'm just feeling a little bit like life is too short for the amount of time that it is taking to get to the story. So I don't know whether I'll go on beyond volume 1 at this point, but I remain committed to finishing volume 1. This week I made serious headway in Mary Beard's SPQR, A History of Ancient Rome. And this is a book that I decided to read for Historathon, for the first quarter of Historathon, which is an event that I'm participating in for the first time. I wanted also to participate in Robert G., Reader of Books, his event on reading about Roman emperors, but I decided before reading Mary Beard's book on Roman emperors, I should read SPQR first. I am enjoying this book immensely. It's been a long time since I've read about ancient Rome, but I find Mary Beard to be a very accessible writer. She does assume in this book that her readers have some basic knowledge of ancient Roman history, but still, she is telling her story. She's writing this narrative in in a voice that is really engaging and very accessible, even to someone like me who, I consider myself a novice in this area. Next, my book group, my in-person book group, met this week to discuss Louise Erdrich's newest novel, The Mighty Red. Erdrich is one of my favorite novelists. I don't think I've read all of her books, but I've read many of her novels, and I've been reading her novels for decades, really. That being said, this wasn't one of my favorites of her novels. This novel is written in her characteristic style, with many short chapters that kind of provide for us a panoramic view of the many characters that she's writing about. And many of her novels are written in that style. I found in this novel that there were maybe too many characters whose stories we had to become invested in. There were too many characters to follow, and I felt like it just took too long for all of the various threads of this story to come together. Normally, Erdrich writes about important themes involving Native Americans in the United States. She writes about relationships between whites and Native Americans. She writes about people's relationship to the land. All of those themes are present in this novel, but not as fully developed as they usually are in some of her works that I have really loved. I'm thinking specifically of The Night Watchman and The Sentence. Most of this novel, The Mighty Red, most of this novel revolves around a relationship between two families. The Geists are the wealthy landowners, but they're a deeply troubled family. Their son, Gary, is a superstar on the local high school football team, also called the Mighty Red. But he's a really troubled kid, and we only gradually find out during the course of the novel what it is that has caused him to be so deeply troubled. He was involved in the not so distant past in some kind of a horrible accident that resulted in the deaths of a few other people and serious injury of others. But it takes almost the entire novel for this story to unfold. It keeps getting hinted at, but the hints are quiet and subtle, and it just takes a long time for the trauma that Gary has been through to really be revealed. Gary is madly in love with, or at least madly obsessed with, a girl in his class, and her name is Kismet Poe. Kismet is the daughter of Crystal, who works for the Geist family. She drives a truck for them. Early on in the novel, and right as they're graduating from high school, Kismet agrees to marry Gary. And she agrees for reasons that are not really clear. Her mother certainly doesn't want her to do it. Gary's mother very much wants them to get married. Kismet is actually really in love with another boy. His name is Hugo. He has dropped out of school. He's been homeschooled. And he's this gentle, brilliant kid. and she really wants to be with him, and he wants to be with her, but she agrees to marry Gary. It simply takes too long for all of these various threads of the plot to come together. I love Louise Erdrich. I think she is a brilliant writer. As I said, she's one of my very favorite contemporary novelists, but I felt like this book just somehow just missed the mark. There were aspects of it that were humorous. The writing is engaging. It just took too long for the story to come together. And that was pretty much the experience of just about everybody in my book group as well. I also finished this week Claudia Pineiro's novel, Elena Knows. This is the fourth of her novels that we have read so far in the Pineiro project, which we are discussing on Voxer. I'll include the names of all of the people in the Pineiro project. This includes a number of booktubers and several subscribers as well. And it is quite simply a brilliant group of people who are engaged in this deep dive into Pineiro's work. We're still discussing Elena Knows for a few more days, so I'm not going to go into a lot of detail, but this certainly was one of the books that I finished this week that packed a really powerful emotional punch. This was, for many people, a couple years ago, this was their introduction to Claudia Pineiro, and so those who have read this, earlier, and I think people were introduced to it because she was shortlisted for the International Booker Prize, I think in 2022, and I think that's when a lot of people discovered her. This is a reread for many people in the group. For me, it was not. This was my first reading of Elena Knows. This novel was actually written in 2007, but it wasn't translated into English until 2021. Elena, of the title Elena Knows, is a woman in her early 60s, and she's suffering from a very severe case of Parkinson's disease. In fact, I think the doctor refers to it at one point as Parkinson's plus. The novel describes one day in her life, and it's structured around the times of day when she has to take her medication, which actually enables her to move her body. Without the medication, she can't move at all. We follow her on this excruciating trip across the city to find an acquaintance who Elena believes will be able to help her to prove that her daughter, Rita, did not commit suicide. She wants this woman, Isabel, to help her prove that the death was the result of foul play. The book offers an excruciating depiction of the ravages of this disease and also the debilitating effects of caretaking on the daughter, Rita. We're still discussing the novel in our Voxer group, so I'm not going to give my final thoughts on this yet. I will just say that I was compelled to read this book. I read this book in one sitting. I mean, it's a short novel. It's under 150 pages long, but still, I read it in a couple of hours. I couldn't put it down. but I will also say that I was just emotionally destroyed by this book. We're having a really, really important discussion of it right now, and I'll try to share more thoughts about this next week. Next up in the Pinero project is A Crack in the Wall. This is one that I don't think anyone in our group has read yet. Nobody seemed to know much about this, and this was published by Bitter Lemon Press before Pineiro went over to this publisher, the Charco Press. This is also, I believe, translated by her former translator, Miranda, France. So this is starting up next week. So it was really a week for very dark and disturbing books, and a couple of these left me in kind of a tough place for a while. I also finished this week Valeria Luiselli's Lost Children Archive. And this is a novel that I am reading with Mariandrea's group, Books and Bocadillos Book Club. And this is a club focusing on works by Latinx authors. It so happens that all of the choices for the immediate future are Latina authors. This novel was written in 2019 because of the ongoing American policy of separating children from their parents at the border, at the Mexican-U.S. border. In this novel, a family known only as Mama and Papa and the boy and the girl are making their way across country from New York to Arizona because the father is working on a documentary project on the Apache, and he wants to get to Arizona to complete his project. The mother is on a project of her own. She's looking to find two Mexican children who have been separated from their mother. And the mother in the novel knows this mother from her life in New York. And the children have gone missing. It becomes apparent as this novel progresses that this family is also falling apart on their journey. It's written in a really interesting way. It does cover a couple of different points of view, but I found that sections that were told from the boy child's point of view, I found that they, while very moving, didn't sound at all like, the authentic voice of a 10-year-old boy. I think, like this novel was trying to do too many things in an attempt to show these important issues. I think that I don't want to say it lost its focus, but I think it piled too many things on. We're looking at the dissolution of a family, and that's a story in and of itself. She's trying to address the migrant crisis, and that's a gigantic story. She's also trying to deal with the genocide of Native Americans, another gigantic thematic story. It is possible, I think, for a novel to be really well-intentioned, and I think this one was, and yet also at the same time kind of miss the mark, and that was how I felt about this one, and it just was another emotionally devastating reading for me. Okay, so one of my big goals for 2025 is care. And that includes, physically, physical exercise, which I do a lot of, getting good sleep, eating well, and I do all of those things. I'm doing a really good job with that. But I need to be better about focusing my reading on things that aren't going to leave me devastated. I just find as I get older, I get into these stories. I read intensely, but I don't bounce back the way I did when I was younger. I stay emotionally in places that that aren't always so good for me. So, I ended up finishing 2 books in my effort to read classic science fiction. And I'm reading with 2 different groups that involve a lot of the same people. And these books actually provided some relief to all of this intensity that I've been talking about. And I think that's because they just provided a really wonderful imaginative escape. I'm going to list the hosts of both of these events. This is the Heinlein 2025 and the Clifford D. Simak 2025 groups. And I'll put all of the people who are involved in those in the notes below. But we are discussing in the Heinlein group Red Planet. This is the January pick, and we're going to be talking about this. It will be today when this video posts. It will be on Saturday, so it's going to be on Saturday that we will be discussing this in a live stream. I have 2 copies of this. This was the one that I originally bought, which has the entire novel in it. And then I was also able to get a used copy of this edition, which was published a little bit later. And this also contains the whole novel, but it also shows the original manuscript from 1949 and all of the things that Heinlein was forced to remove from the novel by Scribners. So it was just interesting to be able to take a look at that. So Red Planet was written by Heinlein for his juvenile series. He wrote this novel in 1949. I talked a lot last week when I was just starting the book. I talked in my weekend, my weekly wrap-up last week about the changes that Heinlein was forced to make by Scribners in order to make this book suitable for kids. And I think much of what had to be removed was a lot of the talk about guns. They were not removed from the novel, but there's a great deal of sort of talk about Second Amendment rights and the right to bear arms, and that talk I believe was removed so that it was not in the mouths of children. But the books the editions that we read are the restored editions. These are as Heinlein originally wrote them. This is about a colony of human beings living on Mars. And it focuses primarily on 2 teenaged boys, Jim and Frank, who are attending the Lowell Academy, where they get into a lot of trouble with a very authoritarian headmaster. The main issue is that Jim has come to the school bringing with him a Martian friend, a friend that he calls Willis. The headmaster wants to take Willis away because he deems Willis as a pet, but Willis is not a pet. He's a Martian creature, but he is a friend to the boys. Willis has this strange ability to record verbatim conversation that he hears with the exact, voice, intonation. He's almost like a tape recorder, and this actually uncovers the major conflict of the story, because while Willis is in his little captivity, he overhears a conversation and in fact records this conversation, which reveals a nefarious plot on behalf of the company, and the headmaster is a part of this company, which could jeopardize the lives of all of the people in the human colony, including these boys, their families. So this begins a very exciting adventure to try to save the human race on Mars. Heinlein does some really interesting things in this novel. While I was put off in the beginning by all of the talk about guns and gun rights in the mouths of, there's one character, a doctor, who does a lot of that talk, but the two boys also do a lot of that talk. And I think it affected me the way that it did because I was a high school teacher for almost 40 years. And these were years that included active shooter drills, regular school evacuations, where you have to move the entire school to another location, many, many school lockdowns, some of which were drills, some of which were not. So it's hard for me to read about teenagers talking about their rights to carry guns. But I also realized that Heinlein wrote this book in 1949. This is a post-World War II novel. This is a very different America than the one that we're living in now. But he also does some other really, really interesting things in this novel with regard to gender and female roles in particular. And I think in that regard, in some ways, Heinlein was decades ahead of his time. And then finally, the last thing that I finished this week, which did wonders at uplifting my spirits, was Clifford D. Simak's The Goblin Reservation. Now, this is a book that we're also reading in the month of January for the Clifford D. Simak group. And that's a group that was started by Sean D. Standfast, but I'm going to list in the notes all of the people who are involved in that as well. This novel was written in 1968, and it combines time travel, human beings, goblins, trolls, banshees, a saber-toothed tiger, a Neanderthal man who is living in the 2020s, a ghost who doesn't know who he is the ghost of or where he's come from, a dragon, and William Shakespeare. What's not to like? This novel was, for me, just pure fun. I loved this motley assortment of characters. I loved its mostly lighthearted tone and just its overall sense of playfulness. I just absolutely loved it, and it left me in a very good place. So that's it for this week. That's my weekly wrap up. As always, I thank you for watching. I hope that you're doing well. I'll speak with you again soon. Take care.